Welcome to our Red Hat Government Symposium Executive Insight Series. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and we're here today with Dave Egts, Chief Technologist for the North American Public Sector at Red Hat. Dave, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here, Wyatt.
So let me start by asking, where have you seen examples of how the government's use of data is really fueling digital transformation for the public?
Yeah, it's growing more and more. It's like when I think about digital transformation, it's all about improving service delivery and user experience. And I've seen agencies use site usage data to not only improve their website and the user experience, but also to take a look at the underlying processes themselves. So let me give you an example. Like you see a lot of times you go to the websites, you see the chat bots that are on there. You may it may be collecting telemetry and you may not even know it, right? But these are great sources to pinpoint where users are struggling on a website. And based on that information, you can make a lot of fixes. So, just an easy fix is that if you pinpoint where somebody's having a problem, maybe they keep asking the same question in the chat bot, right? Is to, update your frequently asked questions with that question to sort of head it off, right? A better fix would be to update the website to eliminate the need to ask the question in the first place, right? But the best fix is to even consider those fixes that I mentioned before, but also take a look at whether the user's struggle is related to actual underlying processes and see if you can improve those processes and look for choke points or look for business friction where you can improve upon them that ultimately improves the digital experience that our end users are looking for.
That's a great illustration, and I love that last point. Next, tell me a little about how you see open source technology and platforms playing an important, if not increasing role in government, particularly as it's faced critical challenges of late, like the COVID-19 response.
Yeah, so one of my favorite examples is the city and county of Denver. So when COVID hit, they needed to shift their 15,000 strong workforce to a long-term uh, remote work environment practically overnight. And so to keep everybody connected while they're remote, they all standardized on Microsoft Teams as their collaboration platform of choice. And at the time, they had plenty of those 15,000 users. They were not provisioned, and they obviously needed to provision those users in a hurry. And when you're in a hurry, you don't want to make mistakes, right? And so this is where open source automation came in to help them out. And specifically, they were using Red Hat's Ansible automation platform. So Ansible did all the provisioning, the application deployment, the configuration management of their Microsoft Teams environment, and the results were pretty amazing. So Ansible, it helped Denver out. It helped them grow their Microsoft Teams use by 514%. It also allowed them to quickly launch a virtual emergency operations center for their government leaders within Microsoft Teams. And then lastly, once they have that all figured out, now they have this lean work approach for future projects so they could use open source automation to rapidly respond to business needs in the future.
Well, I love that example, both in how they rallied quickly, but also set themselves up for greater success down the road.
Yeah.
On a kind of related matter, I'm curious to get your thoughts. How does open source enable better cybersecurity for agencies?
Yeah, so whenever people, ask me about open source and security, I'll always point back to what people affectionately call Linus's Law, where it goes back to Linus Torvalds. I think it was coined by Eric Raymond. But anyhow, Linus's Law asserts that given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And so open source transparency creates this incentive to write code cleanly and more securely because everybody's going to see it. And they're also going to know who wrote the bad code. And so sloppily written code is not going to get accepted by the upstream communities. And plus, that code that does get accepted gets analyzed by researchers around the world for vulnerabilities. So let's say, heaven forbid, a vulnerability is found. It's made public pretty quickly. So this forces the right incentives for the communities to have that vested interest in responding quickly to create a clean fix for that vulnerability. And that's really, really different from the traditional model of security through obscurity with proprietary software because it doesn't get that same level of public scrutiny.
Well, really hard to argue against that. And then maybe lastly, Dave, what trends or technologies are you seeing that you think government agencies should be paying attention to in the coming year?
Yeah, so this is going to be a mouthful. So get ready for this. So it's open source artificial intelligence and machine learning at the edge. So told you it was a mouthful, but I see it as a confluence of all these different technologies, and I really think that next year is going to be the year for the combination of all of these. So if we take a step back, you know, over the past couple of years, you know, we've all been hearing about AI and ML, and the advances have been so rapid and just amazing. And a lot of this is thanks to the elasticity of public clouds and GPU enabled supercomputing. And in these cases, you know, all the data, they were collected and then sent off to the cloud or sent off to the HPC data center for analysis. And these models work really well for the workloads where you have the time to collect and transfer all that data to the cloud, but they aren't as effective when you want to make real-time decision making. And that's where I'm thinking about that next frontier. And I'm really thinking it's going to pop next year where, you know, that analysis and the decision making is going to happen where the data are being generated at. And that's at the edge. And so if you can move the compute to where the data are, you're able to gain insight faster, possibly instantaneously. And this really unlocks the ability to solve problems that were considered impractical or even impossible. And this is where I really think open source is going to be that accelerant for AI and ML, because if you build your AI and ML models on open source in the cloud, you're able to transition them to the edge with little to no rework because you're built on top of this open substrate. And so open source AI and ML at the edge not only makes the impossible possible, but it also makes the impossible possible even faster.
That's a great point and makes a lot of sense. Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share your observations and your insights on the potential of open source for the public sector. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Wyatt.